So this is one of those occasions where at least peaceful nationalism could really be a good thing for all of us to help keep us from this agenda, to help protect us from this agenda. A lot of the globalists, today's globalists who are pushing the globalist agenda very actively are, I believe, also involved in Satanism and Satanist abuse. So we need to be wary about what the big picture is on all this. And to, okay, I know he's unpopular with some or maybe many Americans, but at least Trump is very right to oppose globalism. And that in itself is a big obstacle to the Satanists, because obviously the USA is the only superpower left in the world. And if they are opposed to globalism, then, well, Trump has to be removed. That's their view. And replaced with somebody who will sign the US up to the globalist agenda. And of course, that will eventually lead to the global government becoming more and more powerful. We've seen something like this in Europe with the EU, the European Union. That's nations signed up to the EU initially thinking it was mainly about economics. But as time went by, they were giving up more and more of their national powers and discretion to the EU. And the EU has never been a very transparent and accountable body. And so now they're talking about the EU becoming like a United States of America, a United States of Europe, and having this much more powerful government over the EU than was originally considered when it first started. So at least in the UK, there were a lot of people saying that this is not what we signed up for. You know, we've been led down this road where we've had our national discretion and discretionary powers and freedoms chipped away. And fortunately, the UK did vote for Brexit and did eventually get Brexit, despite all the fight that the EU gave the UK government on this. The EU has a strong vested interest in seeing the UK fail economically, because if the UK fails, other countries will be much less likely to dare to leave the EU, because they will say, well, look, UK tried to go on its own and survive economically outside the EU and it failed. So we must stay in the EU, at least for economic prosperity and security. And this is another part of the big picture, because this New World Order, one of the key components is the European Union, and the European Union as a model for eventual world government.
So who are these politicians that you spoke of earlier in the UK or around the world for that matter that you're aware of that are pushing globalism or talking about it seriously? And are people taking these guys serious? And is there any substance to what they're talking about and what they're pushing as far as globalism?
I think the globalism has a lot of support from various UK politicians, including some very senior ones. So, for example, the politician who called for the setting up of one world government to deal with the
pandemic.
The pandemic, for example, that was Gordon Brown, the former UK Prime Minister. And that lends a lot of impact to the statement because he's a former Prime Minister of the UK. The other politicians who have been supporting this kind of approach are generally on the left of the political spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
So you will find, for example, when Britain was trying to implement Brexit, there was a lot of opposition from the left. because they are more in favor of the European Union, and they would try to, if not stop Brexit from happening. And interesting to bear in mind, Tony Blair, the Labour Prime Minister, former Labour Prime Minister of the UK, was actually saying at one point, just ignore the referendum vote, ignore the majority vote of the UK people, and keep the UK in the EU against the will of the majority. That was his opinion at one point that he expressed about how to deal with the referendum result. That's how desperate some of the left-leaning politicians were to keep the UK in the EU. And of course, Tony Blair has always been a very active globalist. So I suspect you have the same attitudes in the USA, with more politicians on the left wanting the US to go down the globalist road than those on the right of the political spectrum. The fact is, this is the new world order that we've been talking about. A one world government, a globalist political remaking of world politics. And at the top of the pyramid, ruling over all this, will be the Satanist so-called savior, who Christians refer to as the Antichrist.
Mm.
And then all controlling, micromanaging rules will come in on all of us, having to be micromanaged by this one world government. We're already going in the general direction of micromanagement. You would have noticed it, especially with the pandemic. Suddenly we're being told what distance we have to keep from others, when we have to wear a face mask. We can't assemble in more than a certain number of people. I've noticed a lot more interest in SRA since the pandemic started and the restrictions were implemented, because people suddenly realize how fragile their freedoms are, how it can just go like that.
Right.
And in the UK, we've spent months in lockdown, similar to house arrest, you could say, and with very little political debate, just basically Parliament rubber stamping all these restrictions for our own good, inverted commas. The numbers are questionable. I do not know about where you are, but in the UK, there have been questions about the numbers of actual deaths from COVID-19, because there's suspicion that a lot of these numbers are inflated. I'm not saying there's no COVID-19. I'm saying that a much smaller number of COVID-19 cases have occurred, but they're being amplified, exaggerated in order to achieve a certain political agenda. So, for example,
right. They're weaponizing it to their own
agenda. There are concerns that, for example, there are people who died with COVID-19 present in their bodies, but not from COVID-19 killing them, being added to the statistics.
Right. Because
that, of course, will jack up the numbers.
Right. And then in the US, hospitals that do that, they actually receive more money from the government when their patients are dying of COVID. So, if they had COVID and they died of a heart attack, they get paid something in the realm of $30,000 for a COVID death versus like $5,000 to $10,000 for a heart attack.
So that encourages exaggerating the numbers. And another source of questioning is a reliable contact of mine going to look at some of the hospitals which were supposed to be full of COVID-19 patients, and seeing that the hospitals were practically empty. Doesn't match the rhetoric.
Right.
What's being reported, what's on the ground. You'd expect the hospitals to be flooded with patients, and at least the hospitals that my contact went to visit and look at, and because he was questioning what was being claimed by the government, were empty. He even told me that some of the medical staff were just like sending text messages, looking at their mobile phones, not terribly busy. So it just adds to the suspicion that the numbers are being grossly exaggerated for a political agenda, which is to justify more restrictions, more control, more micromanagement, more calls for one world government to deal with this huge, inverted commas, problem. And I think we need to be looking below the surface, questioning these things, investigating, going to hospitals where you'd expect, if there were really this large a number of patients, that the patients would be at those hospitals, and seeing how crowded they are and how many of the patients there are actually suffering from COVID-19 or from other illnesses.